Bleach the Thousand Year Blood War episode 6 is out, and this was a really hype episode. Probably the best episode of this season so far. I keep saying that every episode because every episode just keeps topping it every single week, but this one was honestly very incredible and probably one of the best fights of the fall season, if not the year, with how amazing this fight sequence was. And the reveals and the setup for the next episode is honestly incredible, with a really awesome cliffhanger once more. But before I get into the actual video, it's just something I want to state real quick. In the comments of my episode 5 Thousand Year Blood War review, there were actually some spoiler-ish comments. Now, I don't usually mind this, but there are going to be people watching these videos that are most likely going to be anime only. I was practically almost spoiled for certain things that were said in those comments, but I ended up being impatient and I read this fight in the manga shortly after episode 5. And all I read was up to the end of this episode, basically, from the manga. So I am still basically blind for the rest of the arc, but I knew what this fight entailed, what was going to be shown, so I wasn't spoiled by these comments. But if you are a manga reader, do not spoil the events of this anime in the comments unless you say spoilers, and just leave at least 3 to 4 like blank lines for your comments if you're going to talk about spoilers, as I do feel like anime onlys will get spoiled if they watch these reviews and then they look at the comments and see spoilers. So I just ask to keep that in mind. But that out of the way, let's hit the intro and get right into the video. So, let's just go off and say this. Yamamoto is a freaking beast. I'll get into the events of the episode in order, but first I just gotta say Yamamoto was a freaking beast. Did not disappoint. Last week hyped me up to see this man in action, and this episode just did not disappoint with how Yamamoto was portrayed. And the best part is that this episode opened up with Uryu reading his grandfather's journal, talking about the Quincy annihilation from 1,000 years ago, going into detail to an extent on what happened, everything with basically some lore for Yhwach and Yamamoto's confrontation, which we get glimpses of in this episode as well, which honestly, Bleach lore, beautiful. I'm so happy we got this kind of lore, and I'm honestly really hyped to see what else we could end up getting for the lore. So the basic Cliff Notes version for that we got is essentially Yhwach and the Quincy wanted to eradicate all the Hollows, but in order to do that, they had to go and take down all of the Soul Reapers. So they tried invading Soul Society, but they ended up losing, and essentially that was the whole Quincy annihilation. But there were still surviving Quincy's many years later, which a purge more or less happened 200 years ago, leaving very few surviving Quincy's, like Uryu and his family. So that does give some more context, and I like that one of the images that was used for like the Soul Reapers fighting that they were defeated was of a younger Yamamoto that was drawn in there, and that plays a part in this episode as well, as we transition to Yamamoto confronting Yhwach, and swiftly but surely saving Kenpachi before he gets killed, like in an instant, quickly grabbing Kenpachi away from Yhwach and just setting him down. And let's just say this, Yamamoto does not waste any time. He more or less, after engulfing the area in flames and gets ready to fight, the flames disappear, the sun comes out, and you just how the visuals show the heat of the situation, the actual like high temperature of people sweating, lips getting chapped and cracking, the flowers wilting, the waters evaporating. Yamamoto goes into his bankai for the first time in the series, something I have been waiting, and I'm sure everyone has been waiting for to see since Yamamoto's introduction, because Yamamoto was only really fought with his Shikai, and his Shikai was already incredibly strong, so his bankai was bound to be completely insane. But when he activates his bankai, the flames just disappear in an instant. Instantaneously, all the flames are gone and the light is everywhere. And this was an awesome reveal, as the sword is just all charred up. And I like how Yhwach was basically going back to the time he previously fought Yamamoto, and that this sword is incredibly strong. And that one instance when Yamamoto swings his sword and it taps the ground as Yhwach dodges, it completely destroys, evaporates that whole area of the ground in an instant, like a giant crater in the ground, showing the pure destructive power of that hit. Oh man, now that was really cool. But the thing I liked, aside from like the awesome Saga action scene, seeing both of them just trade blows, as well as Yhwach basically being on the defensive for the majority of this fight, what really got me invested outside of the awesome animation was the fact that Yhwach and Yamamoto were remembering their previous conflict 1,000 years ago. Throughout this fight, we get brief flashbacks interwoven with the present, the past and the present interweaving, to show the grudge that these two have and how their history has just been building up to this one moment. Yamamoto beat Yhwach but wasn't able to kill him 1,000 years ago, and now Yamamoto has to rectify that mistake. And Yhwach has been holding a grudge, same as Yamamoto. So these two converging forces are finally going to meet in a climactic battle. I just love that this entire fight was literally just them going at it, destroying Soul Society in the entire area. Yamamoto basically breaking Yhwach's sword, Yhwach resorting to his arrows, and then Yamamoto using another version of his bankai, his other fighting form. And each form was based off of the different directions. I believe the first one was the east form, and that literally concentrated the flames of his sword at the tip of his blade, which is what I talked about when the second he hit the ground, everything evaporated. Everything he touched exploded and just disintegrated upon being hit. And even Yhwach was like, okay, yeah, if I get hit by this, I'm basically dead. If I get hit by this dead on, I'm dead. And that is just completely insane. Yamamoto compressed all of the flames of his Zanpakuto into the tip of the blade. That is incredibly badass. And I like how Yamamoto in this fight is basically taunting Yhwach, similarly to how the Quincy have been taunting the Soul Reapers to use their bankai. Yamamoto coming up with some kind of theory about the Quincy bankai stealing, which is a kind of logical guess, being that they can't steal a bankai that they don't know all the information and abilities of. They knew everything about the other captain's bankai, but not really Ichigo's or Yamamoto's, because Yamamoto, essentially from what we've seen from this episode, he only really used like one real attack form of his bankai against Yhwach 1,000 years ago, and there's 3 different forms, fighting styles from his bankai that he hadn't used against him 1,000 years ago. And we're going to see all 4 forms in this one fight. So aside from the East form, which is basically the Blade Edge, hell, even Yhwach says that if it wasn't for the Blood ability, the sheer force of the heat Yamamoto produces from his bankai would have burned him to a crisp. And this power of the bankai is literally at risk of destroying all of Soul Society along with Yamamoto and all the enemies at once. That's how strong his bankai is. But his next form is the West form, which basically engulfs his whole body in flames, making it as hot as the freaking sun. And I like that even though we see all the flames all over his body, to the point where the ground, nice attention to the detail from the animation from the animators, where every step he takes, the ground begins to melt beneath him. And he basically just tells Yhwach that now he can't touch him. And the power of this flame, it's not even an actual flame, it's actually Yamamoto's sheer spiritual power, his Ryatsu just billowing out of him, looking like flames. And so Yamamoto charges at Yhwach, but Yhwach ends up activating his own special Quincy defense ability. I can't pronounce it right now. It says it's a good mix of offense and defense, and the second Yamamoto steps in it, he will be ripped to shreds. But in that instance, as he's charging, Yamamoto stops and falls to the ground, placing his sword into the ground, saying that you won't hit me, as he then unleashes the South technique of his bankai, which is honestly freaking scary, making Yamamoto seem like the villain with how he kind of does this. But essentially, after placing his sword into the ground, he calls upon the corpses and ashes of all the dead who were killed by the flames of his Zanpakuto, primarily his bankai, and makes them fight on his behalf as limbs to take down his enemy until they're burnt to ashes themselves. And I just love this kind of sick irony that while Yamamoto is basically like a Soul Reaper or a Shinigami in the Japanese, a god of death, he's literally reviving the dead to fight for him. So that is just sheer insanity. I have no idea how that works for Zanpakuto, but my god, this is amazing. And to make matters worse, for psychological warfare against Yhwach, Yamamoto literally revives all the dead Quincy he killed with his bankai 1,000 years ago for Yhwach to face down. And the only way for Yhwach to actually go to Yamamoto is to basically smash through and destroy the corpses of his own previous allies. It's just sick and twisted, and I love it, showing Yamamoto literally going all out and not giving two shits about how he looks or whatever. Also, real quick thing, the CG used for the skeletons in Yamamoto's bankai for the South form, really good use of CGI. I could barely tell it's CGI, and this was honestly really great. If anybody complains about the CGI in this scene, I'm just gonna be like, why? It looks perfect for this. It looks really clean, and also sells the unsettling vibe of the fact that Yamamoto is literally reviving the dead to fight for him. But yeah, when he uses this, it also destroys the ultimate defense technique that Yhwach used. And as Yhwach is charging towards Yamamoto, Yamamoto ends up going into the north form of his Zanpakuto, with a big concentrated slash, producing all of the flames from his Zanpakuto and all of his spiritual power into a heat slash as he swings it, and it basically incinerates a good chunk from Yhwach's body. In an instant, we actually see part of Yhwach's arm ripped off. We actually get to see bone and shit from his spine, from the part that was removed, as Yhwach falls to the ground, defeated, and Yamamoto's bankai being released. And I love that the second that happens, with all the heat disappearing from the bankai, it just starts downpouring in the Serete. And that's just a really awesome scene, as Yamamoto just believes that he's won. As we get a big plot twist where Yhwach apologizes, and this is not Yhwach, but somebody else that was mimicking Yhwach, as the real Yhwach shows up instantly. So the whole time, Yamamoto was going all out against a doppelganger of Yhwach. And this guy actually looks just like the guy that fought Kenpachi last episode in that brief flashback that turned into Kenpachi. So either Kenpachi didn't kill the guy, or this is a whole clone. Okay, obviously I read the manga for this portion when this reveal happened, so I can get to the end of that fight. So I do know that it's actually that the guy Kenpachi fought is the twin of this doppelganger. That the one Kenpachi fought, I believe, was just only able to copy the appearance, powers, and abilities of someone, while this one right here that Yamamoto fought was able to copy the personality and the memories. Which, if I'm being honest, the fact that Yamamoto was dominating basically the entire fight and Yhwach was more or less on the defensive, it's very possible the real Yhwach would have been on the defensive for a good bit of it. But in the end, it makes sense. The enemy leader being so easily on the defensive for basically the entire fight. Yeah, that does seem pretty weird. Even though it is the leaders of both factions, you would have expected Yhwach to pull off some awesome technique to actually land some blows on Yamamoto multiple times instead of him dodging or trying to block most of the attacks. But when this happens, Yhwach basically kills his subordinate after saying he did well. Don't know why, but probably to put him out of his misery or something. I don't know. I need to learn more about Yhwach's personality. Because, I mean, the doppelganger guy, was basically dead already. But then Yhwach basically drops another bombshell right now, that the entire time while Yamamoto was fighting, Yhwach was in the prison underneath the Squad 1 barracks to visit Aizen. He visits Sosuke Aizen in the prison, and this scene is just done amazingly, where Yhwach literally offers Aizen the chance to join forces to take down Soul Society, and that they basically have the same path and goal. But Aizen refuses. I mean, Aizen, literally, he's the smartest man. He's one of the smartest people in the entire series. And he basically planned everything up until Arrancar. So it's just crazy to think about. Hell, he literally knew who Yhwach was when he entered the room. Yeah, Aizen basically just refuses, saying that I wouldn't want to follow someone, the mighty Quincy King, who is essentially becoming more like a Soul Reaper. I mean, I feel like we would get more context later down the road, because I doubt Aizen's just going to show up for this one scene for the arc. He's definitely going to have to show back up at some point. But the thing I like is that Yhwach literally designated Aizen as one of the special threats, just like Genpachi and Ichigo. And Aizen basically asks the important question: if I'm one of your special threats, why don't you just kill me right now? You're obviously afraid of my power. I'm sealed up. You can kill me. You can seemingly kill me easily. But Yhwach says, yeah, you are a threat to me. Your power is immense. But since you're fused with the Hogyokyu, it'd take way too long for me to even try to kill you, let alone capture you and seal you away with my forces. So yeah, again, establishing that Aizen is still fused with the Hogyokyu, that never changed. He's basically immortal now. So yeah, it would make sense why it would take an incredibly long time, even for this guy, who is essentially one of the strongest characters in the series right now, being treated as the strongest villain, the final villain of the series, to be like, yeah, it'd take too much time and effort to kill you right now, so I'm just going to leave you sealed up here. It makes a hell of a lot of sense. I hope we get to see more Aizen in this arc, because it'd just be a waste if Aizen didn't show up outside of this one little conversation. But it was just nice to see the previous main villain of the series to the current and final antagonist of the series just meeting and having just a genuine conversation. But the episode ends up ending with Yhwach and Yamamoto getting ready to clash again. Yhwach launches an arrow from the sky into the ground and raises it up as a Quincy Reishi sword, as he basically bids farewell to Yamamoto. As in an instant, blood, we hear a slash, some blood goes on the screen spurting out, as we see Yamamoto hit by this attack from Yhwach, basically looking like he cut him in two, ending the episode on that big cliffhanger. My god, was this an awesome episode. This is probably going to be the longest review I've done for the Bleach anime so far, because I was just gushing over the whole thing. I hope this can be cut down a little bit, but my god, was this an awesome episode. Yamamoto versus the fake Yhwach was honestly incredibly entertaining to watch. Some of the best action and animation from not just Bleach, but from this whole season that I've seen so far. And there's a lot of good stuff this season, and even from the year that we've seen. But this was an awesome fight, and just really feel like the animators were putting all of their effort into this one fight, as this was one of the hypest fights in the manga from what I was being built up to. This fight just did not disappoint. I am immensely satisfied with it. I do hate the fact that Yamamoto was basically fighting a doppelganger for the whole time, and then the second that Yamamoto loses it and is trying to charge at Yhwach, his bankai is stolen. That's something I didn't mention. Yhwach could have stolen his bankai at any time, but it's just the other Quincy wouldn't be strong enough to even handle Yamamoto's bankai after capturing it. So yeah, Yamamoto got the whole thing wrong, but it was nice to get a bit more clarification. And Yamamoto loses bankai, which is why he can't fight Yhwach evenly anymore. So yeah, that is honestly, yeah, that was a pretty big twist. But just having that whole amazing saga-filled action sequence for the entirety of the episode, having the past of these two characters interwoven through this fight, and these are Yhwach's memories and personality shining through in the fake, because that's basically what the perfect copy basically is. It was just amazing. Yamamoto was amazing. I wish what happened at the end of the episode wasn't the case, but it kind of makes sense. You can't kill off the main bad guy in this instance. And it also just shows how cunning this main villain is, for basically being like, okay, I'm gonna go do this. I need a doppelganger to keep everybody busy, to think that I am on the battlefield commanding my troops. And then they're probably gonna have to face off against Yamamoto. And Aizen being in there, basically teasing, yeah, he's gonna have to show up. This was a 10 out of 10 episode. I'm so happy, and I can't wait for next week. Bleach continues to deliver week after week after week, and I just cannot wait to see what happens next. This was hype, and I just don't know what else I could do to talk about how amazing this fight was. But yeah, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section down below about this episode and everything about Yamamoto versus Yhwach. What do you think is going to happen next? How impressed were you with the animation, and how hyped were you during this whole fight and this whole thing about how the fight interwove the past and the present in a seamless flow to really convey the message and feelings of both fighters, as well as the whole thing that Aizen was in here and Yhwach wanted to recruit him and Aizen just flat out said no. Leave your thoughts and opinions in the comments, and also don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. It really helps, and it shows that you guys enjoy the content on the channel, and I cannot wait to talk about Bleach more until this first core is over. We're halfway through the season. Let's try and get through the rest of it, and let's wait for more awesomeness. But with all that said and done, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope you all have an awesome day.